Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Sip&Talkers, and welcome back to the show.
Hello, everyone. It is great to be back.
Okay, so today we're tackling a topic that I know can make a lot of people's eyes glaze over.
Oh, yeah. Democracy versus autocracy.
Exactly. And you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with me? I'm just trying to pay my rent, figure out my weekend plans, and make sure my Switch connects to the internet.
I mean, that's fair. But the whole point of our chat today is to connect those dots.
Right. We want to talk about how the type of national operating system you live under has a direct line to, well, your delivery apps, what you can say online, and even where you can go on the weekend.
And I came across this really interesting idea recently, this concept that frames democracy as a contingency.
A contingency. That sounds kind of weak, doesn't it?
It does. My first thought was, does that just mean it's rare? You know, like being able to leave work on time is a rarity.
Huh. With great power comes great responsibility, right? Let's put leaving work on time aside for a minute and finish this first.
Good call. But this idea of contingency is, I think, a really powerful way to understand it. It's not just that democracy is rare. It's that it's fragile. It's really, really hard to maintain.
And why is that?
Because it demands something that is just completely counterintuitive to human nature, or at least to the history of power.
Which is?
It requires the people in charge to willingly, voluntarily give up some of their power.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's like your boss striking it rich and then not only giving everyone a massive bonus, but also letting the employees vote on whether to fire him next year.
Exactly. It's basically a miracle. It just doesn't happen naturally.
So today, that's our mission. We're going to explore why some people still think that centralized autocratic power might actually be better. What's the logic there?
And then we're going to expose what we're calling the big bug in that logic.
The fatal flaw that turns that slick, efficient operating system into, terrible software that only serves a tiny handful of people and makes everyone else's life miserable.
We're calling this one the loop of doom. Why centralized power can't fix its own mistakes.
Okay, so let's dig into this idea of contingency. Where do we even start? I guess we have to start with the default setting for human politics, right? What happens if you just let things be?
You get autocracy. That's the default state.
The path of least resistance.
Absolutely. If you look at the grand sweep of history, concentrating power in one place or in a few hands is the natural sort of low energy state. It's like a boulder rolling downhill.
And what's pushing it?
The most basic human needs, really. Desire for order, for protection, for things to just get done quickly. Efficiency.
So it's just easier.
Way easier. The data on this is pretty clear. Since about 1900, if you look at the timeline, closed autocratic systems have been the dominant form of government for something like 70% of that time.
Wow.
Yeah. The second a system gets stressed or shows weakness, the simplest way to get stability is to put one person or one small group in charge.
And it doesn't take much to set one up, I imagine.
Not at all. That's a key point. You need very low social consensus. All it really takes is a few determined elites, maybe a military coup or just a smooth inheritance of power.
Whereas democracy requires, well, everything.
It requires everything. A constitution, courts, a free press, political parties, and most importantly, the buy-in of millions of people who agree to play by the rules. It's an infrastructural beast compared to autocracy.
Okay, so if autocracy is the default, if it's this massive political gravity well, how does anyone ever escape it? This gets us to that counterintuitive elite choice, right?
This is where it gets really fascinating because we tend to think of democracy as this, inevitable endpoint of evolution. The society gets richer, more educated, and then boom, democracy.
But that's not really how it works.
Not according to economists like Acemoglu and Robinson. They argue that democracy is almost never a gift from a benevolent ruler.
It's not a moral decision.
It's a strategic one, a compromise. They say it's usually an accidental outcome that happens during a huge crisis when the balance of power suddenly shifts.
So what does a crisis like that look like? Are we talking about like riots in the streets?
We're talking about full-blown revolution brewing on the horizon, a massive labor uprising, a devastating economic collapse, maybe losing a big war. The elites in power look at the situation and they basically see two doors.
And door number one is?
Door number one is revolution. They get overthrown, they lose everything, their property, their power, maybe even their lives.
Not a great option.
Not at all. And door number two is compromise. They agree to share a little power, set up elections, respect some laws in order to avoid door number one.
So democracy becomes the second best choice. It's basically a hedge against losing it all.
That's it, exactly. They trade their absolute political control for the long-term safety of their money and their assets under a system they don't fully control, but one that has the rule of law. It's a calculated risk, born out of self-interest, not a sudden change of heart.
Which explains why it's so rare and fragile. If it depends on this perfect storm of a crisis and a calculated bet by the rich and powerful, it's not going to happen very often.
The numbers are pretty stark. Since the 1800s, you can really only point to about 50 successful, long-lasting democratic transitions globally.
Only 50. That's it.
That's it. And it's one thing to transition to democracy. It's a whole other thing to make it stick, to consolidate it.
Right. There's a difference between tearing down the old building and actually constructing a new one that can withstand an earthquake.
That is a perfect analogy. And the data from the VDEM Institute shows exactly that. Tearing down the autocracy, the protests, the fall of the regime, that takes, on average, about 2.6 years.
Pretty quick.
But building the new institutions, the consolidation part, that takes an average of 5.5 years, more than double the time.
And I'm guessing a lot of them don't make it through that construction phase.
A huge number don't. These new democracies have a really high chance of collapsing or backsliding within the first 5 or 10 years. If that delicate power balance that forced the compromise in the first place shifts back, say the economy suddenly gets better or a new strongman appears, the whole thing can just snap right back to autocracy.
This all leads to my favorite concept from this whole section. Democracy by mistake.
It's so wonderfully cynical, isn't it?
It is. It's not just about compromise. It's often just about pure incompetence from the person in charge.
This is a wild finding from a political scientist named Daniel Treisman. He looked at all these transitions since 1800 and found that a staggering 64 to 67% of them were triggered by a major screw-up by the autocratic leader.
So not planned reform, just a big oops.
It's a very big oops. It could be anything. Maybe the leader totally misjudges how bad the economy is, and suddenly there are food riots. Or he fires the wrong general who then leads a coup, or he starts a disastrous war that just bankrupts the country and destroys his legitimacy.
So more than 2/3 of the world's successful democracies were born because a dictator, totally blinded by his own power, tripped over his own feet and accidentally created an opening.
It's democracy as an accidental byproduct of failure. Treisman's research shows that only about 1/4 to 1/3 of transitions are actually the result of some intentional plan or pact among elites.
That just hammers home the contingency point. If that one leader had been a little bit smarter or just a little luckier, that window of opportunity might never have opened.
And we can see this play out in recent history, right? With the so-called waves of democratization.
The third wave in the 70s is a big one.
Huge. You have Portugal's Carnation Revolution in 74, or Spain's transition after Franco died. These were incredible achievements that took immense work to solidify.
But the fragility is always there, lurking under the surface.
Always. And the global trend right now is actually what experts call democratic backsliding. The VDEM data shows that around 30% of countries that made that transition later fell backward.
You see that in places like the Philippines, which had this amazing people power revolution, but still struggles constantly with corruption and populist leaders.
Or a place like Hungary, which is often held up as a country that is, systematically and legally dismantling its own democratic protections from the inside.
So the big takeaway here is that democracy is sort of like a political anti-gravity device. It's incredibly difficult to build, it's expensive to run, and it's in a constant battle against the natural gravity of concentrated power. It's an achievement you have to fight for every single day.
Okay, but we have to be fair here. If democracy is so hard and so messy, you can see why people would be tempted by the alternative. We need to actually explore the appeal of centralized power.
Give it its due. Why does it still look so attractive, even to people living in democracies?
Well, the first and most obvious selling point is the promise of extreme efficiency.
Right. The idealized version of autocracy is like the perfect tech startup. There's no board to argue with, no committees, just a visionary CEO at the top who makes a decision and everyone executes instantly.
And that speed is incredibly seductive. It cuts through all the political drama, the messy compromises, the legislative gridlock that defines democracy.
And I imagine that appeal gets even stronger during a crisis.
Oh, absolutely. When you're facing a pandemic or a massive environmental disaster, or you're in some high-stakes tech race, the slow, deliberate pace of democracy can feel dangerous.
You want someone to just take charge and fix it.
Exactly. The ability to concentrate power to handle big issues looks like a feature, not a bug. People want decisive action.
And that promise of efficiency is often tied to a moral promise, right? The utopian vision of equity.
Especially in systems that were founded on communist or socialist ideals. We have to acknowledge that the original philosophy was, in many ways, very noble.
The idea of getting rid of exploitation, of creating true equality.
Right. It's a direct answer to the biggest, most persistent problem of capitalism.
Which is that the incredible wealth it creates is never shared fairly.
Never. I mean, you look at the stats. The top 1% globally owns something like 45% of all wealth. It's staggering. And this centralized utopian model comes along and promises a radical fix. A classless society where it's to each according to his need.
That's a powerful moral argument. It promises to get rid of the greed and selfishness that seem to be baked into our market economies.
It reframes the entire purpose of government. The goal is to maximize welfare for everyone, not just to help the rich and well-connected. And that unity of purpose allows for another big selling point.
Long-term strategy and unity.
This is the classic knock on democracy, right? It's too short-sighted. Everything is dictated by the next election cycle.
A leader can't plan for 10 or 20 years down the road because they might be out of a job in 2.
Precisely. But a single-party system, in theory, can set a 30-year goal for industrialization or a 50-year plan for infrastructure and just see it through without getting derailed by elections.
So they can build the high-speed rail network because there's no opposition party that's going to come in and cancel the funding in the next term.
That kind of disciplined, long-term planning is very attractive, especially for developing nations trying to catch up, or for anyone who feels like democracy is just too paralyzed by infighting to tackle huge problems like climate change.
But this attraction isn't just theoretical. It's being fueled by real-world problems right now. All this modern discontent is the fuel for that fire.
This is so important to understand. For a lot of people, especially younger people in the West, this isn't some blind faith in an old ideology. It's a pretty logical response to the failures they see all around them.
You're talking about the polling?
Yeah, the polls in the U.S. are eye-opening.
Oh.
Something like 62% of people age 18 to 29 have a positive view of socialism. And a third, 34%, have a positive view of communism.
And that's not just an abstract idea for them.
Not at all. They're looking at their own lives. They're drowning in student debt. They can't afford to buy a house. They see total inaction on the climate crisis. And they see an economic system that feels rigged.
So they look at the gridlock and the inequality and think, maybe that other system, the one that promises efficiency and real equality, is worth a shot.
Exactly. So the temptation is real. It's powerful. It's rooted in this promise of a better, faster, fairer world.
As we said at the top, this perfectly designed piece of software has a huge, fatal bug baked into its source code.
And it's a bug that you can't patch. It's part of the core design.
So let's get into that. The fatal flaw. The loop of doom.
Right. And it all starts with something called elite capture, or what some people call the iron law of oligarchy.
Which basically says what?
It says that even if you start with the most idealistic revolutionaries, the vanguard, who want to build a paradise for the people, the very act of them taking total control corrupts the project.
Because once they have all the power,
they are accountable to no one but themselves. And the moment accountability disappears, self-interest becomes the only thing that matters.
So the mission changes.
It inevitably shifts from serving the people to keeping our power and getting rich. The ruling group, the party, the military, whoever it is, they become a new privileged class, hoarding all the resources and special treatment for themselves.
The revolutionary becomes the new king, which leads to this idea of purpose inversion.
Yes, the entire goal of the system flips 180 degrees. That inspiring promise of liberating humanity becomes the grim reality of subjugating the majority to protect a tiny elite.
The very people the system was supposed to help become the least important part of the equation.
They become an obstacle even. When the state's #1 goal is just to stay in power, then genuine feedback from the public or local needs, they're not just ignored, they're seen as a threat.
This is where you get those historical catastrophes, right?
Exactly. The great famines in the Soviet Union or in China weren't just bad luck with the weather. They were a direct result of a centralized system that prioritized ideological purity and party quotas over the actual survival of millions of people. The machine starts to eat its own citizens to protect itself.
And that flawed structure is what creates the loop of doom itself, the vicious cycle of error accumulation.
This is the central terminal illness of autocracy. Its biggest strength, that top-down efficiency, is also its greatest long-term weakness. Because without any feedback loops, Mistakes don't get fixed. They get buried.
And they compound.
They compound exponentially until the whole system breaks.
So let's walk through the steps of that route. Step 1.
Step 1. No free media, no opposition parties, no independent watchdogs. This means any initial mistake, any bit of corruption is immediately hidden. It's censored. The leadership lives in a bubble they built for themselves.
They only hear what they want to hear.
Or, more accurately, what their underlings think they want to hear. And that's step 2. The entire system learns that telling the truth is career suicide.
So you get promoted for flattery and loyalty, not for competence.
Exactly. Everyone starts faking the data. They report huge economic growth that isn't real. They invent public health successes. The information flowing to the top becomes completely distorted. The state is flying blind.
And the leader is making massive decisions based on total fiction because the system incentivizes lying.
Which leads, inevitably, to step 3. A massive systemic failure finally happens. A supply chain collapses. An environmental disaster occurs. People finally rise up. And because the system has no other tools, its only response is violence and suppression.
Which just destroys any remaining public trust and guarantees the next crisis will be even worse.
That's the loop. Hide the error, lie about the error gets bigger, use violence to maintain control, and then collapse.
And you can't escape that loop because of what you call the perfect emperor blind spot.
This is the fundamental, flawed bet that all centralized systems make.
They're betting everything on one person?
They're betting that their leader, their emperor, is going to be perfectly wise, perfectly moral, and all-knowing. And if you had a leader like that, sure, the system would be amazing, but people aren't perfect.
And if the leader is just average or incompetent, or even worse, if they're malicious...
The system has no safety net, no brakes, no emergency stop button. There's no institution that can check their power or correct a catastrophic decision. The entire fate of the society is tied to the flaws of one single human being.
Whereas a democracy, for all its messiness, makes the opposite bet. It assumes everyone is flawed, so you have to build a system that spreads out the power to minimize the damage any one person can do.
Precisely. The great temptation of autocracy is based on an impossible ideal of human perfection.
So now let's contrast that loop of doom with democracy's greatest strength, its built-in error correction system.
Right. Let's talk about the democratic advantage and what it actually means for you, the listener, in a tangible way.
It starts with the idea of institutionalized admission of error. The system is designed to admit it's wrong.
Yeah, we call it messy, but the messiness is the feature. Think of it like a software company. When you, as a citizen, have a problem, the traffic is terrible, the schools are failing, that's a bug report.
And in a democracy, there's actually a system for submitting that bug report.
Exactly. You can protest, you can talk to the media, you can vote for an opposition party. Those are all channels that force the government to acknowledge the bug and issue a patch or an update, a new policy, or even a new government.
In the autocratic system, your bug report is just noise or a virus.
It's a threat to be silenced. Democracy says, thanks for the feedback, we'll work on an update. Autocracy says, the software is perfect, you are the problem.
And that fundamental difference leads to maybe the most important benefit for the individual: protection from forced lockout, the rule of law.
This is where it gets really personal. The core promise of a stable democracy is that the rules of the game are clear and they apply to everyone. Your assets, your savings, your business, they can't just be taken away on a whim by a powerful leader.
We see that happen all the time in other systems, where an anti-corruption campaign is suddenly launched, and it just so happens to target the leader's political rivals and seize all their money.
Absolutely. In a centralized system, your success and your security depend entirely on staying in the good graces of the people in power. The rules can change overnight. That makes it impossible to plan for the future.
The rule of law means your hard work is actually yours. That's a huge deal. And that stability over time adds up.
It does. It leads to long-term welfare superiority. Democracy might seem slower and less efficient day to day, but over the long haul, it produces societies that are healthier, safer, and more prosperous.
And we're not just guessing here. There's real data on this.
Yeah, you can look at things like the Human Development Index, or HDI. The studies on this are incredibly consistent. Consolidated democracies consistently and significantly outperform authoritarian countries on all the key metrics: public health, life expectancy, education, you name it.
Why is that? Why does political inefficiency lead to better human outcomes?
It's all about incentives. To stay in power, a democratic government has to win votes from the general public.
So they have to actually care about the public's welfare.
They have to. They need to invest in good schools, reliable hospitals, clean water. An autocrat, on the other hand, only needs to keep a small circle of elites happy. The military leaders, the party bosses. They have very little incentive to spend money on the general population.
So the slowness of democracy is actually what forces it to deliver better results for more people over time.
Exactly. So let's break down the actual hardware that runs this error correction system. We call them the 4 pillars.
Pillar number 1.
A free media. The fourth estate, its job is to be the watchdog, to expose problems and hold the government accountable.
Pillar 2.
Competitive parties. This prevents any one group from getting a monopoly on power and forces them to listen to different ideas.
Pillar 3.
An independent judiciary.
Yeah.
This is the neutral referee that enforces the rules of the game, the Constitution, and makes sure no one is above the law.
And the fourth and most obvious pillar.
Regular elections. The peaceful way to fire bad leaders and hit the reset button without having to start a revolution. These 4 things working together are what diffuses power and allows the system to fix itself.
And we have some pretty famous examples of this whole machine kicking into gear to save the system from itself.
The classic case study is always Watergate in the U.S. You had a president engaging in illegal acts, a massive abuse of power. In any other system, that would have been covered up.
But the pillars held.
They did. The free press broke the story. The independent judiciary enforced the law and ruled against the president. And Congress started the process to remove him. The system corrected a huge violation at the very top, and it did it without violence.
A more recent and messy example might be something like Brexit in the UK.
Oh, Brexit was incredibly divisive and chaotic. But the process showed the pillars working, even under immense stress. You had the court stepping in multiple times, most famously when the UK Supreme Court told the Prime Minister he couldn't just shut down Parliament.
So even a powerful leader with a strong mandate was still subject to the rule of law.
Exactly. The system was bent way out of shape, but it didn't break. The conflict was forced into legal and electoral channels instead of just collapsing into chaos. That's what resilience looks like.
Okay, this is the hard part of the conversation, because for all its strengths, it feels like that democratic correction system is, well, it's glitching badly.
It is. The system is facing enormous internal threats. Often, the very people who are supposed to be upholding those pillars are the ones tearing them down.
And it starts with this shift toward what some call formal democracy.
This is a really subtle but dangerous trap. A lot of Western democracies have gotten complacent. We focus obsessively on the procedure of democracy, like, did we hold an election? And we ignore the substance.
The actual results. Is the government actually working?
Right. And what happens is politicians start using their election win as a shield. They say, hey, you elected me, so I can do whatever I want until the next election.
It becomes a way to avoid accountability, not ensure it.
It does.
Yeah.
And it makes the whole correction system really passive. The only chance you have to fix things is one vote every few years, which isn't enough to solve deep, long-term problems.
And that problem is made so much worse by the failure of our first pillar, the media.
The media pillar is in deep, deep trouble. The whole business model has changed. It's no longer about objective reporting. It's about getting clicks and feeding your audience's existing biases.
So they stop being watchdogs and start being attack dogs for their political team.
They completely abandon their duty to be a whistleblower for society as a whole. And this creates these powerful information cocoons where people are living in completely different realities depending on which news channel they watch.
And you can't have a rational public debate if you can't even agree on basic facts.
You can't. And it's why trust in the media has just cratered. That pillar is barely standing.
So if the media is broken, you look to the parties. But that system is also a source of destruction now.
It is, for 2 main reasons. First, there's money politics. It costs a fortune to run for office, so parties spend all their time raising money from wealthy donors and special interest groups.
Which means they're not listening to regular voters, they're listening to their donors.
And necessary reforms that might hurt those donors, like fixing the tax code or tackling climate change, just never happen. The second problem is veto politics.
Where the whole point is just to stop the other side from doing anything.
Yes. The system of checks and balances gets turned into a weapon for gridlock. You see it with things like government shutdowns or the filibuster. Governance grinds to a halt because the only goal is to make the other party fail.
The whole system just gets stuck in a permanent freeze. And that level of dysfunction drives the final, most dangerous problem.
Political polarization and judicial erosion. When the conflict gets this bad, it starts to infect everything, including the last line of defense, the judiciary.
The referee starts picking a team.
That's a great way to put it. Judicial appointments, especially to the highest courts, become these brutal partisan battles. Judges start being seen as political actors in robes, not neutral interpreters of the law.
And if people lose faith in the courts, if they believe the whole system is rigged, then the whole concept of the rule of law starts to fall apart.
It's catastrophic.
Yeah.
And you see the result in how citizens are reacting to all this. It's creating this atmosphere of anxiety and apathy.
A lot of people are just angry. They feel completely ignored by a system that seems broken and corrupt.
And that anger is a weapon. It's what populist, figures like Donald Trump use to gain power. They tap into that rage, they promise to burn the whole broken system down, and they attack the very institutions, the pillars that are supposed to provide those checks and balances.
And what about the other side of that? The highly educated people who see what's happening.
Many of them are suffering from what's been called specialized indifference. They know exactly how broken things are, but it's so stressful and overwhelming that they just withdraw. They check out.
So you have one part of society that's mobilized by anger and another part that's paralyzed by anxiety.
And that is a recipe for deep instability. It's how you slide into what's called illiberal democracy, where you still have elections, but all the real substance, the real freedoms and checks on power are slowly being hollowed out from the inside.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. We've talked about the promise of centralized power and its fatal flaw, that loop of doom where mistakes just pile up until the system breaks.
And we've contrasted that with democracy, this fragile, contingent miracle that survives because it's designed to find and fix its own bugs.
I think a good way to summarize the whole thing is with a breeding analogy. Autocracy is like political inbreeding. All the decisions are made in a tiny, closed-off gene pool. The errors and flaws just accumulate over generations until you get a catastrophic failure.
And democracy then is what?
Democracy is the system that insists on bringing in new blood. It disperses risk by forcing different groups to compete and compromise. It's messier, for sure, but that diversity is what gives it long-term strength and resilience.
So the whole choice for a society is between accumulating risk in one place or dispersing it across the entire system.
Right. And in a way, living in a democracy is like buying error correction insurance for your country.
The premium is really high, though.
Oh, the premium is incredibly high. All that messy debate, the slow pace, the gridlock, that's the cost. And as we just discussed, a lot of people are getting tired of paying it.
But that premium is what guarantees the country won't just drive off a cliff because the perfect emperor at the wheel turned out to be, just a flawed human being like the rest of us.
And understanding that trade-off paying the high price for resilience now versus facing the catastrophic cost of fragility later is maybe the most important takeaway from all of this.
Cheers to contingency and checks and balances.
So before we go, just our standard disclaimer. Our goal here is always to look at the facts and different academic views as objectively as we can. We're not here to criticize any particular country or group of people.
We just want to give you the tools to think for yourself and understand how these big abstract ideas really do shape your daily life, your job, your savings, your freedom to speak your mind.
Absolutely. If you found this useful and want to keep exploring these ideas with us, please make sure you subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you're listening. And speaking of rarity and the low odds of success, we have to give a shout out to our friend Mickey.
Yes, Mickey. Please, he has a YouTube channel. It's called Mickytolife. He's got some really funny stuff on there, including some vlogs from a trip he took to Europe.
He actually asked us why his European travel vlogs have like 12 views. Mickey, we're trying. We plug you on every single show.
Go support that man. Go give him a like. Tell him we sent you.
Seriously, sometimes website traffic is just as rare as democratic contingency. Was that a bad joke? Sorry.
We'll see you next time.